Adolf Hitler, born in 1889 in Austria, was the leader of Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945. As the head of the Nazi Party, he rose to power through propaganda, exploiting economic hardship and anti-Semitism. His ideology, outlined in Mein Kampf, promoted Aryan supremacy and blamed Jews for societal issues. Appointed chancellor in 1933, he quickly dismantled democracy, establishing a totalitarian regime. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy led to World War II, starting with the invasion of Poland in 1939. His regime annexed Austria, Czechoslovakia, and other territories aiming for global domination. The Holocaust, one of history's worst atrocities, was orchestrated under Hitler. Approximately 6 million Jews, along with millions of Romani, disabled people, political dissidents, and homosexuals, were systematically murdered in concentration camps like Auschwitz. Jews were rounded up, forced into ghettos, and subjected to starvation, forced labor, and gas chambers. Brutal experiments, mass shootings, and death marches further exemplified his cruelty. Hitler's policies also led to the deaths of over 70 million people during the war, including civilians bombed in cities and soldiers in brutal campaigns like Stalingrad. Domestically, Hitler's Gestapo suppressed dissent through fear, torture, and executions. Books were burned, and propaganda glorified his image. His obsession with racial purity led to forced sterilizations and euthanasia programs targeting the disabled. In 1945, as the Allies closed in, Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, leaving Germany in ruins. His legacy remains a stark warning of unchecked hatred and authoritarianism. Genghis Khan, born Temujin around 1162 in Mongolia, founded the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. Rising from poverty, he united Mongol tribes through alliances, marriages, and warfare by 1206, taking the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. His military genius, using cavalry, psychological warfare, and espionage, allowed him to conquer vast regions, including China, Central Asia, Persia, and parts of Eastern Europe. His conquests were marked by staggering brutality. Genghis Khan's armies slaughtered entire cities that resisted, such as Bukhara and Samarkand, where tens of thousands were beheaded or buried alive. In Khwarezm, he ordered the massacre of over 1 million people, with survivors enslaved or used as human shields. His campaigns killed an estimated 40 million people, roughly 10% of the global population at the time. Cities were razed, and skulls were piled into pyramids to instill fear. He also employed scorched earth tactics, destroying agriculture and infrastructure to cripple enemies. Despite his cruelty, Genghis Khan was a skilled administrator. He promoted religious tolerance, standardized trade routes like the Silk Road, and adopted a meritocratic system, elevating loyal followers regardless of birth. Women in Mongol society had significant roles, and his laws protected his empire's stability. He died in 1227, likely from illness or injury, leaving his empire to his sons. Mao Zedong, born in 1893 in Hunan, China, led the Communist Party of China to victory in 1949, founding the People's Republic of China. A Marxist revolutionary, he aimed to transform China into a communist powerhouse. His policies, however, caused catastrophic suffering, with tens of millions dying due to his decisions. The Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962, Mao's plan to rapidly industrialize and collectivize agriculture was a disaster. Forcing peasants into communes, seizing grain, and prioritizing steel production led to widespread famine. An estimated 20 to 45 million people starved to death, with reports of families resorting to cannibalism. Mao's refusal to acknowledge the crisis and his purges of critics worsened the suffering. Farmers were beaten or killed for failing quotas, and entire villages were wiped out by hunger. Mao's Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1976, aimed to purge capitalist and traditional elements but unleashed chaos. Red Guards, fanatical youth, attacked intellectuals, teachers, and anyone deemed disloyal. Millions were humiliated, tortured, or executed. Cultural heritage, including temples and artifacts, was destroyed. Up to 20 million died, and millions more were sent to brutal labor camps. Mao's cult of personality suppressed dissent, with his image plastered everywhere. Despite modernizing China, Mao's policies crippled its economy and society. He died in 1976, and his legacy remains divisive, revered by some for uniting China, reviled by others for his role in millions of deaths. Joseph Stalin, born in 1878 in Georgia, ruled the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953. Rising through the Bolshevik ranks, he consolidated power after Lenin's death, becoming a totalitarian dictator. His reign transformed the USSR into an industrial superpower, but at a horrific human cost. Stalin's five-year plans forced rapid industrialization and agricultural collectivization. Peasants were stripped of land and resistance was crushed. The resulting Holodomor famine, 1932 to 1933, in Ukraine killed 3 to 7 million as grain was seized while villagers starved. Stalin deliberately targeted Ukrainians, viewing them as a threat, and blocked aid. Cannibalism and mass graves became common. Across the USSR, collectivization caused up to 10 million deaths. The Great Purge, 1937 to 1938, saw Stalin eliminate perceived enemies. Over 600,000 people, including military officers, intellectuals, and party members, were executed or sent to gulags, brutal labor camps where millions died from starvation, cold, or beatings. Families were torn apart, and fear permeated society. Stalin's secret police, the NKVD, tortured confessions out of innocent people, fostering paranoia. Stalin's policies contributed to 20 to 40 million deaths, including war losses, as his mismanagement and purges weakened the Soviet response to Nazi invasion. He signed a pact with Hitler in 1939, dividing Eastern Europe before later joining the Allies. Stalin died in 1953, likely from a stroke. His legacy is a mix of industrial progress and unparalleled repression, with millions suffering under his iron fist. Leopold II, born in 1835, was King of Belgium from 1865 to 1909. He's infamous for ruling the Congo Free State as his personal colony from 1885 to 1908, a territory 76 times larger than Belgium. Presenting himself as a philanthropist, he promised to bring civilization to Africa during the 1885 Berlin Conference, securing control of the Congo under the guise of humanitarianism. In reality, he turned it into a brutal enterprise to extract ivory and rubber for immense profit. Leopold's regime was horrific. His mercenary army, the Force Publique, enforced strict quotas for rubber collection. Congolese workers who failed to meet quotas faced mutilation. Hands, feet, or limbs were chopped off as punishment, often in front of their families. Villages that resisted were burned, and entire communities were massacred. The Force Publique was ordered to provide severed hands to prove they hadn't wasted bullets, leading to widespread amputations of both the living and dead. Starvation and disease, exacerbated by forced labor and destroyed agriculture, killed millions. Estimates suggest 10 to 15 million Congolese died, roughly half the population, due to murder, famine, and disease. Children were kidnapped to work, and mixed-race children of European settlers were forcibly taken to orphanages. Leopold's greed funded lavish projects in Belgium, like the royal greenhouses at Laeken, while Congolese suffered. International outcry, led by activists like Idi Amin and reports from missionaries, exposed the atrocities by the early 1900s. In 1908, under pressure, Leopold relinquished the Congo to the Belgian state, creating the Belgian Congo. He burned Congo Free State records to hide his crimes, saying, "They have no right to know what I did there." Leopold died in 1909, never visiting the Congo. His legacy is a grim symbol of colonial exploitation, with statues in Belgium still sparking protest today. Pol Pot, born Saloth Sar in 1925, led Cambodia's Khmer Rouge from 1975 to 1979 as prime minister. A radical communist, he aimed to create an agrarian utopia by erasing modern influences and restarting society at year zero. Educated in Paris, he joined communist circles before returning to Cambodia, where he rose in the Khmer People's Revolutionary Party after independence from France in 1954. His vision led to one of the worst genocides in history. Pol Pot's regime was ruthless. He forcibly evacuated cities, moving millions to rural collective farms. Money, religion, and private property were abolished, and citizens were forced to wear identical black clothing. Intellectuals, professionals, and even those wearing glasses were targeted as threats to the revolution, often executed with pickaxes to save bullets. The Khmer Rouge turned children into soldiers, indoctrinating them to kill. The infamous killing fields were mass execution sites where up to 3 million people, about 25% of Cambodia's population, died from murder, starvation, or overwork. Bodies were often used as fertilizer. Torture centers like Tuol Sleng Prison saw thousands interrogated, tortured, and killed, with only a handful surviving. Minorities like the Cham and Vietnamese faced systematic persecution. The regime collapsed in 1979 when Vietnam invaded, toppling Pol Pot. He fled, leading guerrilla resistance until 1997, when internal Khmer Rouge conflicts led to his arrest by former allies. He died in 1998, likely by suicide, never facing international justice. Pol Pot's legacy is a chilling reminder of extremist ideology, leaving Cambodia scarred and impoverished. Kim Il-sung, born in 1912, was North Korea's founding leader, ruling from 1948 until his death in 1994. A communist guerrilla fighter against Japanese occupation, he gained Soviet support to establish the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Declared eternal president in the constitution, he built a totalitarian state with a cult of personality, passing power to his son, Kim Jong-il, cementing a dynasty. Kim's rule was oppressive. He initiated the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, aiming to unify Korea under communism, resulting in 3 million deaths, including 600,000 to 1 million North Korean civilians. His economic policies, prioritizing military spending, led to widespread poverty. In the 1990s, his military-first policy and mismanagement caused a famine that killed 200,000 to 3.5 million people, with reports of starvation deaths while the regime hoarded resources. Dissenters faced execution or brutal labor camps, where prisoners endured torture, starvation, and public executions. Kim's propaganda erased dissent, with his image omnipresent. He banned religion, destroyed cultural heritage, and isolated North Korea from the world, fostering a slave-like existence for citizens. Kim's foreign policy included sponsoring terrorism and distancing North Korea from allies like China and Russia, deepening its isolation. His birthday remains a national holiday, and his statues dominate the country. Kim Il-sung's legacy is a repressive regime that continues to starve and control its people, with human rights abuses ongoing under his successors. Saddam Hussein, born in 1937, was Iraq's president from 1979 to 2003. Rising through the Ba'ath Party, he seized power in a coup, establishing a brutal dictatorship. A Sunni Muslim ruling a majority Shiite country, he used fear and violence to maintain control, styling himself as a modern Nebuchadnezzar. His ambition for regional dominance led to devastating wars and internal repression. Saddam's brutality was relentless. In 1980, he invaded Iran, sparking an 8-year war that killed 1 million, including civilians gassed with chemical weapons like mustard and nerve agents. In 1988, his Anfal campaign targeted Kurds, killing 50,000 to 100,000, including 5,000 gassed in Halabja. Entire villages were razed, and survivors were sent to camps. He crushed Shiite and Kurdish uprisings in 1991, killing 150,000 civilians. His secret police tortured and executed dissenters, with mass graves later uncovered. Saddam's regime used terror, including public executions and amputations, to silence opposition. In 1990, he invaded Kuwait, triggering the Gulf War and 85,000 deaths. Saddam's obsession with power enriched his family while Iraqis faced poverty and sanctions. He defied UN inspections over weapons programs, leading to his ousting by US-led forces in 2003. Captured in 2003, he was tried for the 1982 killing of 148 Shiites, convicted, and hanged in 2006. Saddam's legacy is one of war, genocide, and terror, leaving Iraq fractured and scarred. Hideki Tojo, born in 1884 in Tokyo, was Japan's prime minister and military leader from 1941 to 1944, steering the country through much of World War II. A career soldier and ultranationalist, he rose through the ranks of the Imperial Japanese Army, advocating for militarism and expansionism. As war minister in 1940, he aligned Japan with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy via the Tripartite Pact. Becoming prime minister in 1941, he oversaw Japan's aggressive imperial ambitions, believing in Japan's divine right to dominate Asia. Tojo's leadership was marked by extreme brutality. He authorized the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, dragging the US into the war and escalating global conflict. His regime's conquests in Asia, including China, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, led to millions of deaths. The Japanese military under Tojo committed horrific atrocities, such as the rape of Nanking in 1937, where 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians were massacred, raped, and tortured over weeks. Though Tojo was not yet prime minister, his forces also enslaved millions, including comfort women, up to 200,000 women forced into sexual slavery. Tojo's policies endorsed biological warfare experiments by Unit 731, which conducted gruesome tests on prisoners, killing thousands with plague and anthrax. Domestically, Tojo suppressed dissent, using the Kempeitai military police to arrest and execute opponents. After Japan's defeats in 1944, he resigned. Captured in 1945, he was tried at the Tokyo trials, convicted of war crimes, and hanged in 1948. Tojo's legacy is tied to Japan's militaristic aggression and the immense suffering it caused across Asia. Benito Mussolini, born in 1883 in Italy, was the founder of fascism and Italy's dictator from 1922 to 1943. A former socialist journalist, he shifted to ultranationalism after World War I, forming the Fascist Party in 1919. Exploiting Italy's economic woes and fear of communism, he gained power through the 1922 March on Rome, becoming prime minister. By 1925, he declared himself Il Duce, the leader. establishing a totalitarian state with propaganda, censorship, and a cult of personality. Mussolini's regime was oppressive and violent. His black shirts, a paramilitary force, terrorized opponents, beating, killing, or exiling socialists, unionists, and intellectuals. Political prisoners were sent to remote islands or forced to drink castor oil as humiliation. In 1929, he signed the Lateran Pact with the Vatican, aligning with the Catholic Church to bolster his image, but dissent was crushed. Abroad, Mussolini pursued imperial glory, invading Ethiopia in 1935. His forces used mustard gas, killing 150,000 to 200,000 Ethiopians, including civilians bombed in villages. Concentration camps held thousands, and mass executions targeted resistors. In Libya, his regime killed 80,000 people, using gas and starvation to subdue the population. Mussolini allied with Hitler, joining World War II in 1940. His military failures in Greece and North Africa weakened Italy, and in 1943, the Allies invaded. Deposed by his own party, he was rescued by Nazis to lead a puppet state in northern Italy. In 1945, as defeat loomed, he was captured by Italian partisans, shot, and hung upside down in Milan. Mussolini's legacy is a failed dictatorship that brought war, repression, and ruin to Italy. Francisco Franco, born in 1892 in Spain, ruled as dictator from 1939 to 1975 after winning the Spanish Civil War. A career military officer, he led the nationalist forces against the Republican government in 1936, backed by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. Declaring himself caudillo, leader, he established a fascist-leaning regime, blending monarchy, Catholicism, and nationalism. His rule suppressed all opposition, maintaining Spain as a totalitarian state for decades. Franco's regime was brutally repressive. During and after the Civil War, 1936 to 1939, his forces executed 100,000 to 200,000 Republicans, including civilians, in mass shootings or garrote strangulations. The White Terror targeted leftists, intellectuals, and unionists, with mass graves later uncovered. Up to 500,000 people were imprisoned in labor camps, where tens of thousands died from starvation, torture, or forced labor building dams and monuments like the Valley of the Fallen. Franco's regime abducted 30,000 to 40,000 children from Republican families, placing them with loyalist families or orphanages to erase their heritage. He banned regional languages like Catalan and Basque, enforcing a unified Spanish identity, and outlawed political parties and unions. Franco kept Spain neutral in World War II, but sent volunteers to fight for Hitler on the Eastern Front. Post-war, he aligned with the U.S. during the Cold War, securing his regime's survival. His later years saw economic growth but continued repression. Franco died in 1975, transitioning Spain to a monarchy under King Juan Carlos. His legacy divides Spain, with his mass graves and monuments still fueling debate. Idi Amin, born around 1925 in Uganda, was the country's dictator from 1971 to 1979. A former soldier in the British colonial army, he rose to commander of Uganda's military under President Milton Obote. In 1971, he seized power in a coup, declaring himself president and later president for life. His erratic, brutal rule terrorized Uganda, earning him the nickname Butcher of Uganda. Amin's regime was marked by extreme violence. He targeted perceived enemies, particularly the Acholi and Lango ethnic groups who supported Obote. His State Research Bureau, a secret police, tortured and killed thousands in dungeons, using methods like beatings, mutilations, and electrocution. Estimates suggest 100,000 to 500,000 Ugandans were murdered, with bodies dumped in rivers or mass graves. In 1972, Amin expelled 60,000 Asians, mostly Indians, seizing their businesses, crippling the economy, and leaving families destitute. His purges extended to intellectuals, judges, and even his own ministers, whom he sometimes personally executed. Public executions and displays of victims' bodies instilled fear. Amin's megalomania was infamous. He declared himself King of Scotland and challenged world leaders to fights. His invasion of Tanzania in 1978 backfired, leading to his overthrow in 1979. He fled to Saudi Arabia, living in exile until his death in 2003, never facing justice. Amin's rule left Uganda impoverished and traumatized, with his erratic cruelty remembered as a dark chapter in African history. Vladimir Lenin, born in 1870 in Simbirsk, Russia, was the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution and the first head of Soviet Russia from 1917 until his death in 1924. A Marxist revolutionary, he developed Leninism, advocating for a vanguard party to lead the working class to overthrow capitalism. Exiled for his radical writings, he returned in 1917 to lead the Bolsheviks in seizing power during the Russian Revolution, toppling the provisional government after Tsar Nicholas II's abdication. Lenin became chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, founding the Soviet state. Lenin's rule was marked by brutal policies. To consolidate power, he unleashed the Red Terror, 1918 to 1922, led by the Cheka, his secret police. They executed or imprisoned 100,000 to 200,000 people, targeting aristocrats, clergy, and suspected counter-revolutionaries. Mass shootings, torture, and public executions created widespread fear. During the Russian Civil War, 1917 to 1923, Lenin's Red Army fought the anti-Bolshevik White Army, leading to 7 to 12 million deaths from combat, famine, and disease. His war communism policy requisitioned grain from peasants, causing the 1921 to 1922 famine that killed 5 million, as food was diverted to cities and the military. Lenin ordered the suppression of the Kronstadt Rebellion in 1921, where sailors demanding democratic reforms were massacred, with thousands killed or executed. He also targeted the Orthodox Church, seizing assets and killing 10,000 to 20,000 priests and believers. Despite his revolutionary ideals, Lenin laid the groundwork for Soviet totalitarianism, centralizing power and banning opposition. His new economic policy, 1921, allowed limited capitalism to recover the economy, but his health declined after strokes. Lenin died in 1924, leaving Stalin to inherit his system. His legacy is divisive, a hero to some for sparking communism, a tyrant to others for his role in millions of deaths. Augusto Pinochet, born in 1915 in Valparaiso, Chile, was the country's dictator from 1973 to 1990. A career army officer, he led a US-backed military coup on September 11, 1973, overthrowing socialist President Salvador Allende. Declaring himself president, Pinochet established a military junta, dissolving Congress and banning leftist parties. His regime pursued neoliberal economic reforms, privatizing industries, but at a horrific human cost, targeting perceived enemies to maintain control. Pinochet's rule was brutally repressive. Following the coup, his forces rounded up 40,000 to 50,000 people in stadiums, where thousands were tortured or executed. The Caravan of Death, a military death squad, roamed Chile, killing at least 97 political prisoners by shooting or bludgeoning. Over 3,200 people were killed or disappeared, their bodies dumped in rivers, deserts, or the ocean. Up to 200,000 were tortured, enduring electric shocks, waterboarding, and sexual abuse in secret detention centers like Villa Grimaldi. Pinochet's DNA secret police kidnapped and murdered dissidents, including abroad, such as the 1976 assassination of Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C. He suppressed unions, students, and indigenous Mapuche, with 80,000 to 200,000 exiled. Censorship silenced media, and books were burned. Pinochet's economic policies enriched elites but widened inequality, leaving many Chileans impoverished. International pressure and a 1988 plebiscite forced him to step down in 1990, though he remained army commander until 1998. Arrested in London in 1998 for human rights abuses, he faced house arrest but returned to Chile, dying in 2006 without trial. Pinochet's legacy splits Chile. Some credit his economic reforms, others condemn his atrocities. Robert Mugabe, born in 1924 in southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, ruled Zimbabwe from 1980 to 2017, first as prime minister, then as president. A Marxist and African nationalist, he fought in the Rhodesian Bush War against white minority rule, leading the ZANU-PF guerrilla movement. After independence in 1980, he became a global symbol of anti-colonialism, but turned into a repressive dictator, clinging to power through violence and economic mismanagement. Mugabe's regime committed horrific acts. In the 1980s, his 5th Brigade, trained by North Korea, launched the Gukurahundi campaign against the Ndebele minority, seen as rivals. They massacred 10,000 to 20,000 civilians in Matabeleland, burning villages, raping women, and throwing victims into mass graves. Political opponents faced torture, imprisonment, or assassination, with ZANU-PF thugs beating or killing dissidents. Mugabe rigged elections, notably in 2008, unleashing violence that killed 200 and displaced 200,000 to secure victory. His land reform program in the 2000s seized white-owned farms, often giving them to loyalists, causing agricultural collapse and hyperinflation of 89.7 sextillion% by 2008. This led to famine, with 7 million Zimbabweans, half the population, needing food aid. Unemployment hit 90%, and millions fled as refugees. Mugabe's cult of personality glorified him as Zimbabwe's savior, but his policies bankrupted the nation. International sanctions targeted his inner circle, and in 2017, a military coup ousted him at age 93. He died in 2019 in Singapore. Mugabe's legacy is complex. A liberator who ended white rule but a tyrant who plunged Zimbabwe into poverty and bloodshed.